I've never seen a tuna of this size before.
No, I think this is pretty small for a tuna.
Is it?
Yeah.
When asking the question, what is Filipino food? There's so much that's left out of the conversation, right?
As outsiders, I think we get a very limited picture of what Filipino food is. We know the typical adobo, kare-kare, because we have access to these things on the outside. But the Philippines is actually an incredibly diverse place.
Right, and right now we're standing in Barm, or Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao. We never hear about food from this region.
We actually never really hear about the Muslim minorities in the Philippines.
True.
How do you create a national identity out of a group of people, spread across more than 7,600 islands?
Belonging to dozens of ethnic tribes, speaking nearly 200 different languages.
Oh yeah, and let's not forget religion.
The men and women of the Philippines received their
That's a
independence.
challenge the Philippines faced when it finally gained independence in 1946, after over 400 years of colonization by Spain, Japan, and the US.
But the problem with forging one national identity is that it might end up excluding some people.
And I guess the question is, if you don't hear yourself reflected in this larger national narrative, where does that leave you?
And what are the real-life consequences?
So we came to Mindanao, the southern region of the Philippines, to find out.
Going to buy meat and I think some coconut, some chili for the dish. I think food that we serve is a crucial part of our identity as a people.
Amir is a proud Tausug, one of the 13 Islamized ethno-linguistic tribes of the Moro people.
For you to present this Tausug food in the mainstream, I think most of the Filipinos will feel a bit surprised that this is part of the Filipino food.
He's also part of the transitional government of the new autonomous region called Bangsamoro or BARM.
It's the only Muslim-majority area of the Philippines, which is Asia's largest Catholic nation.
So a lot of the produce here are coming from different parts of Mindanao.
Okay.
Mindanao is the food basket of the Philippines.
But for all its agricultural wealth, this land of promise is a region that remains the poorest in the Philippines.
We're drawing a huge crowd. Alright, let's skedaddle before we draw a bigger crowd.
We literally have an
Hi,
army.
sorry.
Amir and his aunties will be teaching us how to make tiula itum, a blackened coconut beef soup.
It has this like earthy and nutty smell to it.
Usually after you pound it again with other spices.
Charred coconut paste is a special Tausug ingredient, and it gives the soup its unique black color.
Wow. It's so black. I've never seen this color.
You can only find it in Sulu.
It's celebration food that's unlike any mainstream Filipino dishes we've seen or tasted before.
Drum roll.
What do you think?
God.
It is spicy,
Mm-hmm.
but like, I think this is my ideal level of spice.
Oh wow, it's so good.
Yeah.
I really like the lemongrass inside of it. All the suspense, totally worth it.
I know.
Do you think that food from Mindanao is part of that national narrative of what Filipino food is?
I think there's still a long way to achieve that. It needs a little more awareness, promotion.
Right.
The mainstream Filipino to appropriate food like this, that this is the southern version of bulalo. So I think it's not right to do that.
Right, so
When-
taking their own names of the dishes they're familiar
Why
with.
not call
and
it
then-
tiula itom? Because it really is the tiula itom. We have been marginalized in terms of land, position, of education, of basic social services, and also the chance to mainstream other aspects of our identity like food, like our dances, and of course, first and foremost, the marginalization of our history as a people. There is a written history of this country that does not represent the history of my people.
Mindanao's history might look different depending on who you ask.
When you talk about Philippine history, it's only recently now that there's a recognition of the Muslims or the Bangsamoro contributions.
This is Aldain Alanto. He studies conflict resolution and Bangsamoro history.
For many Moro tribes, this is a story of resistance against various colonizers and the Filipino government.
It's a story of marginalization for some, like the indigenous and Muslim people displaced from their lands in the early 1900s.
The American colonizers and the subsequent Filipino government encouraged Christian Filipinos to resettle in Mindanao through a series of agricultural policies.
By the 1970s, Mindanao was no longer a Muslim-majority island.
When history as well as national policies were carried out, they were left out. And that created insecurity. And precisely that's why some Muslims or the Bangsamoro feel that they are second-class citizens. And it's very hard to work in a country or in a government that you don't feel like you're part of it historically and politically.
So separatist groups like the Moro National Liberation Front and later the Moro Islamic Liberation Front took up arms to fight for an independent Muslim state.
But even after the first autonomous region was established in 1989, bloodshed continued. During the half-century of conflict, brutal violence was inflicted on all sides. An estimated 120,000 people died, and over 2 million were displaced.
Many peace talks later, Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Mindanao was inaugurated in early 2019.
Many Bangsamoro are curious, at the same time apprehensive and vigilant to what will happen to Barn, because past experience with ARMM, there was a little in terms of changing their lives. When I say there should be a legitimate self-criticism, local politicians, local constituents within the Muslim area needs to flesh out their own problems.
And you might be asking what any of this has to do with food. But marginalization comes in many forms.
That food from this region is foreign even to Filipinos themselves is a symptom of a larger issue.
Why do you think there's been so little documentation of the foods here in the past?
The conflict in Mindanao superseded everything that is good about the place. We will not talk about, for example, the local food, because the conflict is everything tend to be centered on that.
Marawi is a good example. Whatever you've heard about this northern city of Mindanao probably has to do with the siege.
In May 2017, ISIL-affiliated militants tried to claim the city as an ISIL territory.
The government responded by deploying troops and using aerial bombardment.
After 5 bloody months, the city center was destroyed. Marawi made international headlines, and many came to associate this region with terrorism. The images of death and destruction burned into memory.
The devastated city center, which came to be known as Ground Zero, remains in ruins 2 years later.
It's crazy. This is like a ghost town.
Everything is still here, the same way that it was left, and you can see plants growing out of the bullet holes on the walls.
Yeah, it's like they're reclaiming the land that everyone else has kind of just abandoned.
I mean, What I noticed are the graffitis on the walls that says private property and yellow signs that says no consent demolition permit.
So much of the reconstruction efforts has been stalled, and I guess there's a lot of like mistrust between the residents and the government that if these buildings were demolished, like they wouldn't have any right to return to their land.
Wow. Oh my God.
Like, how do you rebuild after something like this? I just got such crazy chills.
When people living here fled, they assumed they would return to their homes when the siege was over.
2 years later, many like Hayamara still live in evacuation camps. Temporary refuge turned into semi-permanent homes.
Have you been back to your home since the siege?
First nakambisita, nakapasok kami doon. So wala na, as in. Pati mga gamit na imbis na sana na may lalabas namin is sinira pa.
How did you feel?
Yeah, how did you feel?
Mas masama sa loob. As in, nakakayak na hindi ko ma-explain. So as in, doon ako nang galing. Masakit. Hindi na makilala sa mas matangkad pa yung down sa akin.
So do you have any expectations of returning home anytime soon?
Inshallah, sana makabalik kami as soon as possible. So di ron yun, yung hindi nakakaranas kasi nakakala lang na ang habol lang namin dito na yung relief na hindi.
The impact of the siege has seeped into every aspect of life here. The martial law has been in place since then, not just in Marawi, but on the whole island. Checkpoints, militaries, and curfews have become a part of everyday life.
Even access to food changed because the commercial center was destroyed. The markets still haven't been fully restored, according to our local producer, Ace. She was born in Marawi City.
So these food stalls used to be located in Padian, one of the biggest markets in Marawi City that's located in Ground Zero. But because of what happened, they were forced to relocate, which goes to show that the siege did not only cause people to be displaced, but also the food market, which affects the ability of people to access their food. But at the same time, as you can see, the city is still very vibrant. I think it's one of the strengths of Mindanao, being able to adjust to circumstances.
And you can see this resilience everywhere.
Ace invited us to her favorite place to taste traditional Mindanao food, her home.
Ace, could you introduce us to this lovely lady?
Yeah, sure. So her name is Zoraida Mangadang, but we generally call her Babo, like everyone in the house and in this street, because she is like the Babo of everyone.
Babo is an affectionate term to describe an older woman, kind of like auntie.
So is Babo the best cook around?
Are you Babo?
Yes.
We were gonna learn how to make piaparan a manok, or chicken coconut stew.
So first, she's gonna make a palapa.
And what's palapa?
Palapa is an essential part of every meal.
It's like the seasoning of Maranaos.
It's a mix of grated coconut, spices, and sakuram, white scallion native to this region. Palapa can be used as a marinade, a condiment, or even an appetizer.
Mapasadaya na buyo na. Then after that, you're gonna have to pound it, Eugene. Tiguan sa timos.
I can do that.
Good job. You'll get there.
How long do you think this is gonna take?
It's very decisive.
And like in other Moro cuisines, coconut and turmeric play major roles.
So what's the significance of turmeric powder?
Para colorful. Para mapiapigilain.
Is yellow an important color in Maranao culture?
Babs, Yes.
Yes, that was a very decisive yes.
So kalawag na bulong pans kanyan.
This dish is cooked in coconut twice. Once boiled in fresh coconut milk, and then stir-fried with grated coconut.
There's just something so pleasurable about the sound of like the bubbling and sizzling when you open up a pot.
Yeah.
Like,
I think it's because it also signals to us that like food is almost ready.
yeah, exactly.
Because the Maranaos are people of the lake, chicken and meat are typically reserved for special occasions. And this was quite the spread they prepared for us.
Okay, I think we should try the one that we ate first.
We usually use the soup, mix the soup with the rice.
Okay, it's very delicious. How do I say it's very delicious in Mano?
Mapetang.
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 Say it again.
Mapetang.
Mapetang.
Why is it important for your food and your culture to be represented?
Para makaswasiran. Gay pagkanami, gay iptindi kami. Ago giya kami maranaw kami.
The importance isn't about getting claim for the culture and this tradition. It's about letting them know that this tradition is Filipino too.
Babu was here during the siege. Ace was away at school. But whether or not they experienced it firsthand, every Maranao felt the impact, especially in how they were perceived after.
The ideologies that we used to not tolerate, like some people are usually hesitant to say that Muslims are dangerous or Maranas are dangerous, but after the siege, it becomes easier for them to express that in many ways, by verbally or just like by kind of actively discriminating the Maranaos that they meet, because now they feel like because the siege happened and it was caused by a Muslim, like probably all other Muslims are like that. So, which is sad because we are the victims, but at the same time, we have the obligation to prove that we are not the perpetrators as well.
Pinakanbab si tumun ka pero ni karaman.
Salamat. Kasi saya kan. So yung kano saya da kano malak ka.
She says she's thank you for coming here without fear. That's what she said.
That's because when Mindanao is in the news, it's often about the kidnappings, terror attacks, and ISIL.
Conflict sells. And that leaves little room to explore the rich history and culture of these islands.
But that's slowly changing.
What time is it?
Food time. Woo!
I actually looked at my watch.
Like, actually, what time is it?
We had lunch with Chef Dr. Sharif Pendatoon. He writes about food from Mindanao, introducing these flavors to the mainstream Philippines.
Which one is it?
The tuna soup, tuna broth.
Okay.
You guys don't mind MSG, no?
No.
Okay, it probably has a lot of it. Okay, so this would be the sinina.
Okay, this is.
And then this is the kilawin,
Sorry.
kambing.
He's part Maguindanaoan, the people of the floodplains, and the largest Moro tribe.
When you ask someone what you're having for dinner, you'd ask, what fish are you having? So you see the significance, the relevance of fish in our diet and culture.
So how do you say it?
Ni sarano. So literally, what's your fish?
What's your fish?
What's your fish?
What's your fish?
But we're not here to talk just about the uniqueness of food from this region.
Rather than focusing solely on differences, he wants to look at food as a free-flowing exchange of ideas and influences.
Okay, this is the
Kilawing kambing.
kilawing kambing.
Again, this is not, this is not Maguindanao. It's not, so it's an introduction, but it has become part of the repertoire. This mode of preparation, I believe, came from the Ilocanos from the north. This is called tinola or tola. It's a Visayan thing. So, but we do, in Maguindanao, you can call this tininda because there are a lot of Visayans here.
Actually, I would have never imagined tuna in a clear soup like this.
Me neither.
I guess I'm just so used to having canned tuna or sashimi tuna.
Thank you.
The dishes we were eating all embodied a blend of
So,
different
some
backgrounds,
of your family
much like
members are
Datu.
originally from Mindanao?
My grandfather was born here, and then he married someone from the north, in Luzon. My dad, the same thing, so my mom isn't from here as well. So I got to have a taste or a glimpse of a world, a different world. I try to integrate these things into the stuff that I do when I cook, when I write.
All these different markers of identity must be complicated to navigate.
It is quite complicated, but again, we can make it less complicated and simplify it. These things matter as hallmarks or as illustrations of our culture and our past and all these things. But ultimately, all of us have to eat. All of us, just need the same basic things.
There's a really thin line between embracing and being proud of your heritage and also using that as a way to exclude and a way to differentiate.
A lot of push for self-determination often comes from people who have been told for so long that you are this, you are this, you are this. And so a lot of reclaiming seems to happen with these kind of oppressed groups. But then when you go so far the other way, then it just continues the polarization.
Who has the power to change these things is a completely different question altogether.
A nation is a story.
A story we collectively believe in, that binds together a group of people within an imagined border.
But this story shouldn't be about just one protagonist.
Maybe it shouldn't even be one story.
I don't believe that there's such thing as a one version of a Filipino. I feel like the fact that the Philippines is a multicultural community itself is what makes it Filipino.
It's continually changing. It's not stagnant, because if it's stagnant, eventually that's the death of any identity.
Because those we exclude suffer real-life consequences.
And when we exclude, we lose out on so much.
Ready? I'm gonna give us a clap. There you go. Okay.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this episode of Fork the System in the Philippines.
We got to see the side of the Philippines that we had never even known about before.
And it also made us wonder, what else are we missing?
We would love to know what you guys found the most interesting about this episode, and if you know of any other places that are like this, that we should, learn about.
Join us on Facebook, on Instagram, and please share your responses below.
This is our second long episode, so please go make sure that you watch the first one in Korea. And we have lots of other things coming your way, so see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye!